yellow full moon night. Then Mia began to walk up a little hill. There she just stood for several minutes, her back turned towards me. I was really starting to get scared now. The forest was dark, and this was the time of year when wolves were most active. My friends had now finally caught up to us. We all just stared at Mia, who stood completely motionless, like a statue on top of that moonlit hill. Eventually, she turned around, looking out into the darkness of the trees behind us. I swear then my heart stopped. It's hard to describe the following events. I remember my friends and I beginning to lift off the ground with sticks and moss. We panicked and screamed for Mia to help us, but she stood there, seemingly unaffected. It was as if she couldn't hear our cries. Then something else happens that haunts me to this day. Behind Mia, a creature or person stood completely still. It was much taller than her, and very pale, as if the creature hadn't seen the sun for years. Eventually, this person moved towards her, standing next to her. Now I could see it in detail. It looked human, but it was very skinny and had long black hair that covered the creature's front. This creature was definitely female. It had an hourglass figure and breasts. Still, it wasn't a pretty sight. While the face looked very human, it had these very large black eyes that just stared at us. I had no idea what this thing was. Then, the creature turned around, showing us its back. I expected to see a thin skeletal frame with the spine poking through, but instead, there was a big hole on her back, like something you would see on a very old tree. I'll note here that I immediately thought that I knew what this old creature was. In Swedish mythology, we have something called Raw. They're some sort of protectors of the forest that take on the shape of beautiful women to lure men out into the woods, to never be seen again. The Raw's most notable feature, except its beauty, was that it had a hole in its back. However, this thing looked anything but beautiful. Not long after it turned around, revealing its back to us, both it and Mia disappeared. Afterwards, we all fell to the ground. None of us wanted to stay there, so we just ran the fastest we could out of there. I don't think I've ever in my life ran as fast as I did then. I just wanted to run all the way home, and so I did with my sisters. Back at our home, my sisters and I looked at each other. None of us told our parents what happened that night. We just went to bed, seemingly in shock, pretending that nothing had happened, though I'm sure none of us actually slept that night. The weekend after, everything seemed normal. We went to school, but we all just kept quiet about the story. And yeah, Mia was there. She'd apparently forgotten everything about the sleepover. I think that she maybe had just pulled a sick prank on all of us, but I wasn't convinced. Well, after a while, we all sort of stopped being friends. I, who had been happy with everything before, had begun to get huge psychological problems. I began to doubt what was real and what was fiction. This destroyed many years with my family. My illness began getting better. I moved to a big city to study with my sisters, and we all just wanted to stick together. After living there for many years, we found Mia on Facebook. It was my oldest sister that found her. She lived not so far from us actually, so we decided to meet up with her after all these years. We decided on where in town to meet. Mia would meet us at our favorite lunch place in town. I guess I thought we could sit down and talk and clear some things up between us. But that's not really how it turned out. Mia walked in through the door with another woman. She introduced us to her girlfriend. Her girlfriend seemed normal, except for the fact that I thought I recognized her. And eventually it hit me. Mia's girlfriend looked exactly like the creature we'd seen with her that night when we were kids, if she was all cleaned up and more human-looking. The rest of the meetup was as normal as it could be. some small talk about what we studied and how our families were. But the face of that woman, it still haunts me. Both my sisters and I are okay today. I will never go back into the forest, and I probably won't let my kids go out to the woods alone either. Midnight Wake-Up Call from Sparkling Sea Cucumber. I was born and raised in Sweden, but both my parents are from different parts of Finland. All relatives on my father's side originally came from a small village close to Vasa. It's a small village where everyone knows each other, and basically everyone is related in some form or another. In those parts of Finland, the population speaks Swedish, as well as learning Finnish in school. When I was a kid, we often visited my grandparents on my father's side during summer vacation, Easter, or Christmas. I have many fond memories from that time, but there were moments where I was truly frightened. As a kid, I was really scared of the dark, ghosts, aliens, murder dolls, and spiders. I often had frightening dreams where it felt as if I was awake, but I was in fact dreaming. I could lie there in the dark and see how shadows moved, or imagine my bed filled with spiders. I had dreams where I heard footsteps, loud mumbling whispers, or felt as if the bed had moved. I sometimes saw objects move or pictures becoming warped. I could also move freely, so it wasn't a form of sleep paralysis. These dreams usually happened when I was scared and stressed while being sleep deprived. That being said, my sister and I have been through some weird stuff that we can't fully explain. Those things happened when we were both wide awake. Some of these things have been second nature, while others stick out more. It could happen at home or when we were visiting our grandparents, as well as our mom. With all that in mind, the story begins as me, my father, and younger sister arrived in Finland. Dad was driving the whole way from the harbor. I believe it was late autumn, but it's hard to be sure since my memory is pretty hazy and our frequent travels blended together at times. But I know it was getting darker, and summers in northern Sweden as well as Finland are very bright until autumn. We were tired, but had stuffed ourselves with candy as we usually did when we took the boat. I can't remember how old I was back then, maybe around 10 or 11 or a bit older. My sister was 5 years younger than me. As we finally drove down to the gravel walk to a red 2-story house, there was a lamp lit in the window facing the road. Grandma had the habit of staying up and serving us with sandwiches and tea or hot chocolate while asking about the trip, while Grandpa usually kept snoring in the bedroom next to the kitchen. When we arrived, we were all pretty tired, but we stayed up for a little bit, talking and carrying in luggage. As we say goodnight, we took our luggage upstairs where there were 3 guest rooms. My sister and I slept in the second room while Dad had the first room. I always picked the bed closest to the door for some reason, and my sister took the other bed. After brushing our teeth and changing into pajamas, we went to sleep. As usual, I had a hard time sleeping. I kept thinking that some crawling ghost would be coming from the stairs, which was even scarier since I had full view of the staircase. I also began to think about murder dolls, since there was a Victorian-styled porcelain doll placed outside the room on the wall. My imagination was running wild. I was sweating, my pulse going crazy. It took me forever to calm down. Then I slowly started to drift off to sleep, when suddenly there was this loud scream. It sounded as if someone was screaming right into my ear, but it didn't sound human. It sounded unnatural and mechanical. It's hard to describe. I was so startled that I sat up in bed and noticed that my sister was also awake now. I even heard my dad and grandparents moving around in their rooms. We turned on the lamp and just looked at each other in disbelief. We were scared. We'd all heard it. What just happened, and what was it? It didn't sound like something from outside. None of us had screamed. And even more disturbing, my grandpa, who was basically deaf when he took out his hearing aid, had heard the scream too. There were no intruders either. My dad blamed it on some malfunctioning wire or something else. My dad always blamed stuff on something else even though it didn't make sense. He was a skeptic. He claimed that the brain played tricks on people, or he would just blame rats. But we were all hearing this sound, and we all felt as if someone or something had screamed into our ears. We all woke at the same time. I'm not sure what the logical explanation would be. I had an even harder time relaxing after that. I kept wondering what kind of creature could do that, and if it was going to scream again. I don't know how long it took me to fall asleep, but I do remember waking up in the morning, and since that time, we never heard the scream again. Was it something natural? Supernatural? I have no idea. I wish it had been just one of my nightmares. Possible skinwalker in my neighborhood. From Soviet Onion. I believe I've seen this potential skinwalker many times, and I've asked a lot of people in my area about it. I live less than a mile away from a Native American reservation, and I've talked with the locals briefly about what we might be seeing here. Be warned, as the story has some violence towards animals. I live in a town near Phoenix, Arizona. It's small, but there is many mountainous areas right by my house. I've lived here about 1.5 years, and I've heard many people mention that a coyote likes to dig through garbage cans, eat out of the local McDonald's dumpsters, walk through the drain pipes, and supposedly lives in a small park nearby. At first, I thought it was really cool to live so close to the wildlife like this, since I thought we'd only see rabbits and the occasional scorpion. One night, I was taking a walk by myself around said park. I'd brought a flashlight to watch for scorpions on the sidewalk when I heard someone whisper my name. I whipped right around and looked all over the place, but I was the only one in the park. It freaked me out. I started to walk faster, thinking someone might have been following me. I then felt a very cold breeze wash over my skin. I ignored it, thinking it was just the breeze that comes off the mountains on occasion. That's when I saw the coyote that everyone's been talking about. It was standing on its back legs, digging through one of the public trash cans. I froze. Not only was this the first time I'd ever been so close to a coyote that wasn't in a zoo, but the fur on its back made it look as if it had gotten into a fight with a larger predator. Patches were missing and covered in what looked to be dried blood. Figuring if the coyote had won a battle with whatever it had come up against, I slowly backed away and I started to run home. I wouldn't see it again until a month later. My neighbor has an outdoor cat named Marty. Marty likes to pee on people's porches, so my mother set up a frequency alarm on the front and back side of our house. The frequency is one that only cats and other animals can hear in hopes it would scare them away. It also has a red light on the front that will blink rapidly if something is close by, sort of like a motion detector. One night I heard a screech coming from outside my house. My room is in the front, and if my curtains aren't closed, I can see the frequency alarm blink when it senses motion. I got out of bed and moved the curtain to see the red light flashing very fast, but I couldn't see anything in the street. Even so, the light was blinking, so I knew something was outside. The following morning, my mother was talking with one of my neighbors outside on the porch. I came out asking what was wrong. My neighbor had said that Marty came home last night missing an ear and had patches of fur missing from his tail. She kept going on, saying the local coyote must be attacking outdoor cats now. I thought that maybe the screech I'd heard last night was Marty. I wasn't sure, since my cats would have probably lost their crap if they heard another cat at all. Whenever Marty came up to the driveway, my cats would growl and hiss at him. I didn't say a word about the screech I heard. A few days later, I went on another walk, staying just on the edge of the park since there was a sidewalk. I was still terrified of that coyote. I came to the unlit part of the park, and I pointed my flashlight into the brush. However, bouncing back from my flashlight beam were two orange eyes staring directly at me. I immediately moved my flashlight and pointed it at the ground, telling myself I was just freaking myself out. I lifted my flashlight up again at the same spot, and the eyes were gone. I told myself I imagined it until I was heading back home. I decided to take the sidewalk that was right next to one of the main roads, the most lit one. A side note, for drainage purposes, the city had built a very deep ditch along the right side of this sidewalk. Since Arizona gets some very bad monsoons, the ditch gets to about 20 feet up at its lowest point. The part directly behind my house is only about 5 feet deep, with a retaining wall ending my backyard. Anyway, I was walking past the deepest part of the ditch, where the drainage pipes end, when I heard it again. Someone whispering my name. "Jen, come here." I heard it coming from the ditch, and I thought to myself, there's no way that came from down there. It's 20 feet deep. I figured it wasn't anything, and I was just freaking out about those orange eyes. So, being an idiot, I walked over to the edge of the ditch, and I looked down. I almost threw up from what I saw. The coyote was tearing into a cat. I had no idea whether it was Marty or not because I could barely tell it was a cat. I'm still not sure if it was. I thought to myself at first that the coyote is a predator, and I suppose this is normal. The ditch is surrounded by small gray rocks, and I was shaking, and I accidentally slipped a bit, trying to get a better look without having to point my flashlight directly at it. A few small rocks tumbled into the ditch, and that coyote whipped its head around, showing its face to me. I wanted to run and cry at the same time. I had no idea what I was looking at. The coyote was missing its lower jaw completely, and its fur looked as if someone had placed a coyote pelt over a person. It stared directly at me with big orange eyes. I choked, frozen in place. I knew if I moved, I'd be the next victim in that ditch. What it did next fully proved to me it wasn't a coyote. It cocked its head to the side and rotated its head 180 degrees to get a better look at me. I swear I could hear bones cracking and popping out of place as it did so. I thought to myself, there's no way it should be able to do that. Then its body rotated to join the head. I couldn't stop myself. I bolted out of there. I couldn't watch anymore without throwing up. As I ran away, I heard it crawl out of that ditch, stumbling since the small rocks were all over the sides. It began to run on all fours down the sidewalk after me. I didn't dare look behind me. I just kept running. Like I said, this was one of the busiest roads in the town, and I soon spotted a car's headlights coming to turn down the road I was heading straight towards. I then screamed for help. The next thing I knew, I was in my bed. I sat straight up and asked my mom, "What happened last night?" All she told me was, "You came home from a walk with our neighbor Susie, who offered to drive you home since you were really tired." I calmed down a bit and got dressed. I told my mom I was heading to Susie's house to thank her, since I thought I forgot to last night. Susie's house was only a few houses down. I could see the car I'd seen last night and had yelled at. The car had a very large dent on the passenger side door. I rang Susie's doorbell. She answered and looked around wildly outside before letting me in. She was shaking. She asked me, "What the heck was that last night? What was that?" I shook my head. I don't know myself." She replied, "I saw that thing running at you on 4 legs, but as soon as you climbed in the car, it stood up on 2 legs and threw itself at the door. I just stepped on the gas and got you back home, and I didn't see it after that." I told her what had happened to me. She told me she was going to install a security system around her home after that. She was just as freaked out about it as I was, and we swore never to tell anyone in the neighborhood, so that they wouldn't freak out too. I didn't see it for a while, until I began to hear stories from my neighbors about the local coyote eating out of trash cans again. And unfortunately, someone had found their dead cat's body completely torn up in the ditch where I'd seen it. There were also reports of strangely active wolves around the mountainside. People were warned to stay away from the mountain after sunset. The reason I've decided to finally tell this story is because I saw it again yesterday. I was at a streetlight near my house on the main road, and I saw it dash across in front of my car. Its back legs were bent the wrong way, and still, its lower jaw appeared to be missing. It freaked me out so bad that I wanted to warn at least someone. I tried telling my neighbors to just watch out for the coyote, but they only believed me to keep their cats indoors for the night. I haven't seen Marty in a while, and my neighbor refuses to tell us what happened to him. So, if you live near South Mountain in Phoenix, Arizona, keep your pets inside during the night, and don't go out at night without protection, because there might be a skinwalker in the area. If anybody has seen this coyote, I'd love to hear your encounter. South Dakota Sasquatch, from C. Philly 100. This story is told from the perspective of my friend. Being half Native and half African American presents a unique set of challenges living in America, but I feel truly blessed to have grown up and spent much of my life on the Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. Now, it's well known that Native people tend to have more of these types of encounters than most, and Sasquatch are no exception. Many Native people regard Sasquatch as relatives of sorts, distant cousins or something to that extent, and that is not an insult. Quite the opposite, really. Sasquatch are masters of survival, masters of camouflage, apex hunters, and excellent foragers. They love their family members like we do. They
and roasted. What can I get you?
Look, I know I have a couple of four-legged customers every day at Dead and Roasted, but they're different. The four-legged monstrosity you're going to hear about today is something quite scary and different. Something you definitely don't want to see when you're trying to get back to your car after clocking out for the night. Hey there, I'm just about to clock out for a break myself, and I've got some very creepy new stories to share with you today. Stories about crawling freaks, a more than likely fictional but terrifying account nonetheless of a forest ranger murder, and a Craigslist job interview gone horribly wrong. Grab some coffee and a heated blanket. These are tales from the break room. It watches me through the cameras. From Leo. I work as a security guard for an office building. Most of my interactions with the people there are with the law firm that works in that building. But technically, I work for the whole building. There are occasional business meetings from other companies, and the electricians that are in their offices most of the week. All in all, it's pretty quiet. I enjoy being able to stay seated for the workday. Unless, of course, some dispute or incident occurs. But those are very few and very far between. The worst that had happened, up till this point, was a crazed ex trying to enter the building despite one of the lawyers having a restraining order. This changed recently, though, and while I don't think it's enough to get me to leave my job, it has definitely made my nights more interesting, and I don't look forward to them as much. I've been at this job close to a decade now. The owners and security company treat me really well, so it sucks that I'm feeling this way. For reference, I usually work 15-hour shifts for only a few days a week. I keep watching the cameras to see if anything's going on. Occasionally, I act also as a sort of greeter to the building, just helping everyone feel safe. I'm a bit older, so besides that one encounter with the ex I told you before, and maybe one or two more I'm forgetting right now, I usually call up the younger officers to have them deal with anything that gets physical. As it gets later into the day, it ends up being just me in the building, usually, and I like it that way. Moving around too much makes my back and knees ache, and I enjoy the pay for my longer hours as it helps me put my kids through community college. So on average, my nights are like this. Watch the cameras to make sure everyone from the law firm gets to their cars safe. Do a final set of rounds with the youngins. They often beat me back to the security office, as it takes me a bit to do my area. Then I usually hang out near the desk at the entrance, just to make sure all the electricians get to their cars safe too. This isn't really a job of mine, but I enjoy talking and catching up to some of them. The way I see it, my job is to keep everyone safe until they leave the property. I feel as though I should always keep my eye on them even as they leave. After this, I make sure everyone has left the building. Then I say goodbye and goodnight to all the rest of the team, usually 2 other officers, and I settle into my desk, checking the various cameras until the graveyard shift guard comes to relieve me of duty. I do this 3 or 4 days a week, and in my older age, I enjoy having 3 to 4 days of rest. I definitely need it to keep up with all the chaos of my home life with grandkids and all that. Well, the problem is, a month ago, I've noticed something very strange going on outside the back of the building. In that specific area on the camera, I can see maybe 2 or 3 cars at most. More often than not, it's just my old beat-up Chevy. Behind the lot, there's a bit of wilderness, as I call it, but really it's just about 1 or 2 overgrown lots. Never been cleared as far as I know, and I don't think anyone ever will. I know that land sold a while back, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. We all expected a new office or an apartment complex then, maybe even a burger joint or some other fast food restaurant. But no, nothing ever came of it. I say this to paint a picture of what it looks like back there, and for you to fully understand why I became a bit nervous of a possible incident when I saw through the camera a pale man crawling out of the brush in that area on all 4s. My first thought was either this is a prank, something I rarely have to deal with. The only kids who come by the buildings are just taking shortcuts, or this is someone who is really strung out on substances. The city I live in doesn't have much problems with substances. I would say that overall it's a very clean place. And on top of that, the substances I've heard about around here aren't the kinds of things that lead to someone crawling around on all 4s like a wild animal. A bit resentfully, I remember wanting an easy last day for the week. So I got up, my legs and lower back popping, and I stretched for a moment, keeping my eyes on the camera to see exactly what this person was going to do. At the moment, they were just running about, ducking between the cars back and forth, I think. If it was something more, I didn't piece it together yet. It really just looked like someone losing their mind, leaping around like that Gollum guy from Lord of the Rings. I made sure to grab my flashlight and cuffs, and I headed towards the back exit. I remember having my keys on me to make sure I couldn't get locked out. I made my way out the back door. I was hoping and praying the person hadn't got up to anything weirder since I left the cameras. I made sure to open the door quietly, well, as quietly as those metal push-bar doors can be opened, and I shone my flashlight out into the darkness with a click. I caught a glimpse of this individual as they quickly crawled into the bushes. I'm not sure how fast it was, but it was very fast, and while I was a bit concerned on the off chance it was someone in trouble, I got the hint that they did not want to be seen. I checked to make sure the back door was locked, and I went on back to my station. For the rest of the night, nothing else appeared on those cameras that was weird. Later on, I told my daughter about this incident when I got home. Due to her work and child schedule, she's a bit of a night owl. We often talk a bit before she's off to bed, and then it's my turn to watch the little ones. When I told her about it, she was freaked out to say the least, telling me I needed to bring a gun or a knife to my next shift. But I told her to not worry about it so much, that my old mind was probably just playing tricks on me, and that maybe I needed to get a bit more sleep each night. She agreed, but she made me promise to bring a pocket knife at least to my next shift. With her being as stern as her old lady was, I couldn't really say no. After my weekend, I made extra sure to bring my pocket knife along, just as she asked. The first 2 nights back were uneventful. Well, at least pertaining to that thing that came out of the brush. I did have a scare when someone was accidentally locked in the building and knocked on my office door suddenly and loudly. That turned out to be a bad case of food poisoning. They didn't feel safe driving, so they wanted to stay in the office until they felt better enough to drive. Not really a big problem at all, security-wise, but I still would have preferred if someone had told me about this. Besides that, the week was going well. One day, or night really, I was rocking back and forth in my chair enjoying a podcast when I saw the same pale person crawl out of the tree line. I stared at them for a moment. Then I saw them look right at the camera. I finally got a good long look at the person while I froze in horror. Now, in all my days, I've never seen anything like it. Its eyes were sunken in deep. It was much, much taller than I first thought when I saw it that other night. At least, it would have been if it was standing straight up. It also seemed to have very long nails or claws, which looked dirty, but I wasn't sure from what. They appeared to be dark brown in color. Anyhow, the thing eventually slinked back into the wilderness. I wasn't sure how long I'd just been sitting there studying it, but I noticed my shift was just about over, and my phone had died at some point, I'm not sure when. Once my shift had come to an end, I was released for the night. I didn't stay to chat to the guy who replaced me. I just ran as fast as my old legs could take me to my vehicle, and I drove straight home. I told my daughter about it that night. She grew more concerned, worried I was possibly either losing it or I had a stalker of some kind. We weren't big fans of either of these ideas. Nothing else happened that week, and my son took me to the doctors that weekend. I know I didn't tell the whole truth to them, but I didn't want to be told I couldn't work anymore, or that I'd have to be put in a home or something like that. On my way back home from the doctor visit, my son told me he believed me, and that he didn't think I was making it up. He wanted me to try to get some recordings, so I tried to do that the next time I went to work. I talked to some of the more tech-savvy guards, finding out how to get them on my phone, but I made sure not to tell them the times or days I wanted, just that there was some stuff I wanted to look over again. I'm not sure what they thought I wanted, but they did show me how. They're good people like that. I remember vividly my daughter's and son's reactions to the video I showed them. Both assumed I had some sort of freak stalker and that I should just call the police. I wish I had at this point, but I was stubborn. I had it in my head that I was a security guard, and I didn't have a need for police to interfere with my work. Now, I've seen it just about every shift since then, and when it comes, it always at some point starts to watch me, looking through the camera. The worst, though, was the day a boy had come by, asking me if he could put up a missing cat flyer in the window for a calico named Tabby. He told me he lived nearby and that Tabby had gone off into the overgrown lot 2 days ago. He asked if we could keep an eye out for him. Normally, the cat only left home for at most a day. I didn't think much of it then, honestly. The cat was cute, sure. Someone had probably brought it home. But I did keep an eye out for the poor thing. That day, some of the lawyers mentioned seeing a cat out in the parking lot, but every time I went to check, I didn't see it. Sure enough, that night, I did see that exact same cat wandering around my car through the cameras. I took note of it and got up to go get the kid's cat. But when I got near, I heard feline-like screaming and yowling. I charged to the door, slamming it open, looking from the doorway, and there was that person or thing crouched over Tabby, red smears along his mouth. I froze. The door swung back closed, slamming shut. My heart raced. I felt similar to when I had my heart attack years prior. However, when my arm didn't have shooting pains, I realized I was panicking. I pulled at it to make sure it was closed, then checked that it was locked. It took me a bit, but I walked back to the office and finally collapsed in my chair, My head was spinning, thinking of ways I could break the news to the boy. That's when I looked up at the cameras and felt my heart jerk suddenly. The thing was staring at the camera. No, it was like it was staring at me, taking bite after bite from the feline meal. I'm not ashamed to admit that it made me tear up. I watched in shock, unable to look away until a light shone on the creature. Headlights from the next security guard's car. The creature was suddenly struck by the vehicle, dropping the cat from its jaws. Then it ran off into the woods again. I was shaken up pretty bad by then. When the relief got to the office, he was worried about me. But I told him that I had just seen the cat the boy was looking for get caught by a wild animal. When he asked what caught it, I simply answered that it looked like a wolf or coyote, that I couldn't be sure. That seemed to be a good enough answer for him. He walked me to my car to make sure that animal didn't come back. Another specific time that comes to mind was when it had gotten into the building. I don't think it was because of me. I'm usually quite good at locking the doors and remembering to do so. My daughter says I'm OCD about it. I say I'm just cautious, especially since all this started. The night in question was after a night the creature had not showed up. I remember hoping I'd have another quiet night, but sure as fleas on a stray dog, that little monster crept into frame on the camera. We stared at one another again, a game I loathed by then, and still do. Before long, it cocked its head and walked out of frame of the camera. And this time I do mean it walked. It stood up tall on two legs, well over all the cars in the lot. Soon I saw it appear on another camera, one by the back door. First it pushed, and I chuckled to myself knowing it couldn't get in. There's no way it was going to brute force its way through a metal door. I was calm then, maybe a bit amused at its stupidity. It looked into the camera again then and stopped pushing on the door. Instead, it reached a hand out to the door handle. My heart skipped a beat until I remembered that door should be locked, especially if everyone did their jobs right. But I watched it pull the door open. It then broke into a four-legged run through the building at a blinding speed. It hopped across the cameras like crazy. I got up and double, then triple-checked the door to the office. I then put a chair against the doorknob and sat back down in mine. I dialed the police to inform them of an intruder. When they couldn't find anything or anyone, one of them called me a senile old man under his breath, claiming I should know only to call in the case of an actual emergency. I knew for sure then they weren't going to be of any help. I was nervous about leaving that night, nervous about my fellow guards, and I was anxious the entire following day. But once I saw that thing on the cameras outside again the next night, I relaxed a bit, though I've been making doubly sure that door is correctly locked. And I just hope the guards that are there when I'm not keep it locked just as well. Most of the other times it just glares at me in the camera. Sometimes it'll do that similar eating thing again with squirrels or trash. It's always very unsettling. I don't know how it knows, but I know it knows I can see it through the cameras. It's taunting me. At this point, I'd love to get the police involved again if they would actually help. But I know they won't. And I know most people won't believe this story. It's been a while. I don't have the old footage like I used to. And I have no idea how long the security team holds on to old footage. That part of the job was never my responsibility. But do know this, my mental health tests all came back clear. I wasn't hallucinating. I know I'm not crazy. So I guess that means I might be in actual danger every time I'm doing my rounds outside that building. I want to ask the other night guards about this, but I'm worried they'll think I'm crazy, and I'd rather not make enemies of my friends and lose my job. So I'm not sure what to do. And I definitely don't know what it is. Bizarre creature on the way to work. From Anonymous Ranger. This all started back in the 90s. I was a park ranger in the northern part of the US. For my sake and the families involved, I won't say which state it was, but suffice to say it was around the northern border of America. I was on my way back to work after an amazing honeymoon with my husband, and while he had known about my career choice, he never liked me being off alone in nature. He was afraid for me because I was and always will be a short woman. I'm pretty thin overall, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, but that's not the point of this story. My husband wanted me to stay at home and have a baby, but that just wasn't for me. Instead, I demanded I get to go back to spending days, sometimes weeks or months at a time amongst the trees and nature. Sadly, I never got to work my favorite job again. Not really, anyway. It was a pretty far drive away since I moved into my husband's home across the entire state, but it was worth it. Snow on treetops as far as the eyes can see, it's never not beautiful. The long drives in nature were always my favorite, though now I don't think I can stomach one anymore. It was winter then. I'd signed on to the fire watch to make sure that despite all the snow, no dumb kids or irresponsible people left fires going long into the night. And while that is what my job description for that time was, I was really there to make sure hikers didn't get lost and to keep a lookout for our wildlife with how horrible the winter had been up to this point. I'd driven in with my '92 Ford to the ranger station, and from there, after many well wishes and gossip with the girls, I was on my way to my favorite fire watch tower for the winter. If my memory serves me well, it should have been a 3-hour drive to the best location to park to head to the tower. The road continually got rougher, and eventually I couldn't go much farther. Though not the parking area I wanted to park at, I figured once it let up a bit, I'd be able to drive in to my preferred spot. I took out my map and circled on it where I'd parked and looked at the trek ahead of me. It was far. I'd hiked much farther before, though, so I wasn't too worried about it. Hiking the snow was something I really used to love. The crunching underfoot, the blanket of white with occasional animal tracks. It felt as if I was in a storybook or even a fairy tale. This right here was the reason I needed to come back to this job. While I did and still do love my husband, my one true love would always be nature. The day went by in a flash for me. Walking through the snow, taking breaks when I grew tired, drawing in my notebooks and taking pictures with my camera to show everyone when I finally got back. It was just one of those days where you blink and suddenly it's gone, and the sun's about to set. From what I could see on my map, I was just about to the tower, but I wasn't sure if I could camp for the night or not. The idea of getting into the warm tower and getting to talk to the ranger who had been there before sounded lovely. Hot chocolate, a warm, well, warmer than camping, bed, but at the same time the forest I loved and cherished was vanishing quickly into a whirlwind of white and black. It would have been too easy to miss the tower completely. I made an educated choice and began to unpack my bags, setting up camp so I wouldn't end up lost in the snowy wilderness. I began to set up my tent and pack the snow. I put some of the firewood I'd brought into a pile and started a nice campfire. I took all the proper steps to camp out in the snow, something I'm honestly quite fond of. I remember looking up at the tower in the distance, still a good ways away from me before the sun fully set, thinking how lucky they were to be in an actual shelter. I cooked my dinner that night, some sort of meat if I remember correctly. I mean, I distinctly remember it smelling like meat, but I could be wrong. So I ate my dinner, put out the fire, and went to bed for the night. My tent and sleeping bag were as warm as they could be, and I was enjoying camping again after the months of being away from it all. The sound of the wind against the tent started to lull me to sleep, and quickly I began to have a dream. I don't remember what it was about. I remember waking to a god-awful howl. I awoke with a jolt. I scrambled up and out of my tent, flashlight in hand. I shone it into the snowy landscape, searching for the source of that noise. "Hello? Hello?" I yelled out into the night. I remember thinking someone might be hurt. It's okay. I'm a park ranger. Do you need help? Where are you? I shouted again. The cold air irritated my throat after every question. Looking around again, I couldn't find anything. I tried to remember which direction it came from, but I couldn't. It was also my job to help people in these situations. It was the entire reason I was stationed out here for the rest of winter. I went back into my tent, grabbing my gear and rolling up my sleeping bag in record time in case I got lost. I left my tent there, not enough time to take it down. I want to say it took me about 10 minutes to get fully ready and work up the nerve to head out in a direction. If I'm being honest now, my starting direction was random, but at the time I had convinced myself the scream had come from that direction. I marched into the snow, flashlights dancing across the trees. Another scream came about 5 minutes later, if I'm thinking back correctly. At least it felt like 5 minutes. Not much time had passed, that was for sure. I was closer to it this time. It sounded feminine from what I could make out. Ma'am, are you okay? What's wrong? What's wrong? I screamed into the night again, but nothing but hibernating trees could be seen. Hello? You there? I took a moment and covered my mouth back up for a bit. I warmed my face with my breath until it felt a bit warmer. But during that time, I heard another shriek. This one sounded like a word, like help. But I could have just been trying to make sense of it. It came from a bit more to the right than the last one. I finished heating my throat up a bit, then yelled again. Stay where you are. I'll come to you. I raced off again then, into the night, my feet crunching through the snow quickly. And as quickly as I'd set out, I stopped. I saw tracks in the snow. Looking around, there was blood too, as well as boot prints. I followed the boot tracks for a while, but the trail abruptly ended near a larger pool of blood. This person had seemingly vanished. I swung around wildly, and while I wanted to call out to find them, something in me, something deep in my survival instincts, kept me silent. It was like the person had been lifted up from the spot and disappeared into nothingness. I took a deep breath and tried to think what I should do. A scream echoed out into the night again, closer than before. I panicked and I ran. This time I didn't need to convince myself a random direction was correct. Instead, I just fled into the night. Trees flew by in a blur as I weaved in and out of them, trying to put them between myself and whatever had made that horrible noise. I ran until my lungs burned and felt frozen from the cold. I spun around and shone my flashlight to look for whatever or whoever it was. Another shriek echoed through the forest as I glanced around. It was close. I tried to figure out how it had followed me so easily, but then I remembered I was shining a blindingly bright light all around the forest. I jammed my thumb against the button. Instantly, I was submerged in darkness. The wind howled as I heard crunching in the snow. Slowly I stepped, making sure to move as silently as possible. I made my way to the closest tree, or at least where I had memorized it to be, and I hunkered down next to it, covering myself in the snow. There I waited as I heard crunching coming up to where I'd been standing a few seconds before, followed by another deafening shriek. This one felt more angry than the others. I shivered from the cold and shook from anxiety. I held my breath, waiting for this thing to spot me, for this creature or person I couldn't even see to see me in the absolute darkness. I waited, every second feeling like hours. The crunching grew closer. The air started to smell horrid and foul, like a septic tank. I prayed silently as it got closer and closer and closer, until it went past me. I stayed still, waiting for it to pop out from the other side and snag me. But when it never happened, I thanked my lucky stars and quietly got myself up, ready to go again. I had a single goal in mind: get to the tower and report either a rabid animal or a deranged person, and report a possible missing person. Then the police would be involved. I turned my head around toward the tower, or where it should have been. I was always good at navigating in the dark, a special talent of mine, or maybe I was just always lucky. I started off in that direction, going as slowly as I could. The whole time, I kept an ear out for that person or animal. By some miracle, I found myself clutching onto one of the legs of the tower soon enough. I climbed the steps slowly, making sure that my footsteps wouldn't alert anyone of my presence. At the top, I saw the lights were out, but the dim glow from some electronic device illuminated the room lightly. I don't know exactly what it was. I pressed my hands against the glass and squinted in. I saw someone lying there on the bed. I knocked on the door to wake them up, but they didn't stir a bit. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. I grabbed the door handle and opened the door. It was unlocked. I walked inside and checked on this person. I shook them, hoping to wake them up, but still nothing. I took a deep breath, then I clicked on my flashlight. Red everywhere. The person lying there had been turned into a bloody mess. I looked at my hands and saw them drenched in blood. I screamed. I knew I shouldn't have, but I did. There was nothing else I could do. Another shriek from that person or thing outside responded to me. I panicked and slammed the door closed. I quickly dragged some furniture in front of it and ran to the radio. It was completely busted. I looked around and I saw what had been illuminating the room. An old alarm clock. Its dim green glow was too bright now, though. I spun it around and scrambled to pull out the batteries. Then I prepared myself as best I could. I decided to huddle in for the night. Come morning, if I survived, I would make my way back to my car. For the first bit, I actually started to feel hopeful. There were no noises, no shrieks, nothing. That was until I heard the steady thuds of steps going up the tower. Thud, thud, thud. I searched around desperately, trying to find a place to hide. More thuds. I decided that despite how it always ended in the movies, I hid underneath the bed and I prayed. I waited. The thuds continued all the way up to the door, when I then heard a crash against it. The glass from the small window shattered. Another crash. The couch squeaked across the wooden floor. A third crash, and the couch was flung across the room. The door slammed against the wall, followed by the creaks of steps. The wood groaned under its weight, whatever it was. I heard sniffing and more crashing about the room. I held my breath. Then came a crunching, ripping noise from above me. A liquid dripped onto the floor in pitters and patters. I waited until eventually it sounded like the thing left. But I didn't dare crawl out from under that bed. I rolled onto my side and began to cry. My eyes hurt from the tears. I cried until I couldn't anymore, wiping away all the water from my face and drying it with my clothes. At some point, I passed out, and I wouldn't wake up until morning. When I pried myself out from under the bed that morning, I had to do everything in my power not to throw up from the smell and sight. I staggered and hobbled down the steps and into the woods, and after a quick glance, I began to run. I don't think I stopped once. It was a long run, longer than any I'd done before or since. But I found my way back to my vehicle and climbed inside, flooring it back to the station. My report was filed, making sure not to mention that what I assumed it wasn't human nor a normal animal. I simply stated that I did not see who or what it was. Eventually, I was interrogated about the story. The questions are what truly makes me think it wasn't human. I was asked never to speak of it. But after hearing the stories of other former park rangers, I have no reason not to share. And while I do still love how well America takes care of its own nature at times, I fear now more than ever. The reason for that is to hide things like what I encountered that night. When I told my husband, he was shocked. All he could do was hold me. However, I don't think he really believed me when I said it was a monster, especially because I never saw it directly. But from all the accounts I've heard online, I do truly believe with all my heart that I may have encountered a Wendigo, and I also truly believe that it's still out there. With every missing person that's filed in these national parks, I consider myself luckier and luckier that I was not added to that list, that I wasn't hunted down and killed by it. Craigslist job gone wrong. From Boondock. I don't really know where to start here, but here I go anyway. You can call me Ryan. I've learned to be more cautious when it comes to giving out personal information, and I think that this story is proof of that. I live in the US, although in which state I won't mention. At the time of the story, I was living with my sister and her 2 kids. My sister had moved in with me after leaving her abusive husband. The following incident happened about 2.5 years ago, but I'm still suffering nightmares and a bit of PTSD from it. What I'm about to say is 100% true. This is not bullcrap. This is what myself and a friend of mine truly experienced. It was June that year, right around when the pandemic was really getting serious. I'd been working at a group home in my state as a social worker/counselor for abused kids. But then, after a couple of months, myself and a few other employees there, one of them being a close friend of mine named Jake, were let go. I was devastated. I didn't know how I was going to make ends meet. I went out looking for jobs, putting in applications, going to interviews, and so was Jake. But nothing I was doing, anything Jake seemed to be doing, was turning out well in our favor. After the better part of 6 months, with myself and Jake still being unemployed, I know I personally began to get really frustrated. I mean, I had a mortgage to pay, other bills to pay, plus I was taking care of my sister and nephews. So it was safe to say that I needed a job, and quick. So I happened to be searching through Craigslist, and I found this one job. They were looking for people to work at their B&B that was going to open soon. They were looking for live-in housekeepers, a cook, and a front desk clerk. The pay was $20 an hour, and it came with free room and board, with us being able to go back to our own homes on the weekend. I thought, I can't beat that. $20 an hour, that's darn good money. It wasn't working in my career field, but hey, at that point, I was willing to take what I could get. That evening, I called up the number I saw in the Craigslist ad, and this guy with a southern accent answered. I told him I was interested in applying. He asked when I could come in for an interview. I said tomorrow, and he asked if I could come that very evening. Come that evening? I thought that was strange. That would be pretty fast for an interview, and I even said that to the guy. Not that I was complaining though, but I just thought it was odd, especially seeing as how it was already around 4 in the evening and close to getting dark out when I called. The guy had responded with saying they were pretty desperate, and that if I really wanted the position, coming that evening would really help them out. I agreed to come, and asked if I could bring my friend, Jake, since they seemed so desperate for help. And the guy said yeah, sure. He then asked my name, gave me the address of where to come to, and said he'd see both of us when we got there. I told my sister and my nephews, who were 12 and 15 at the time, that I was going to see about a job I found on Craigslist. My sister didn't like the idea, but I ignored her and my eldest nephew's rantings about how I should be careful about responding to Craigslist ads. I left the house and went to pick up Jake. The 2 of us went on our way to the job interview. As we drove, I got annoyed, listening to Jake's constant rantings about how these $20 an hour jobs were too good to be true. I didn't care if it was too good to be true. I needed a job, and I was desperate, so I wanted to believe it was true, no matter what. I couldn't believe how far out it was from the main city, though. I mean, for the better part of an hour, the ride consisted of me driving down a long stretch of rural road with nothing but woods on both sides. When Jake and I finally got there, the B&B was sitting back up off the road and looked like one of those plantation houses that you'd only see in the southernmost states. When we walked up to the porch of the B&B, we were greeted by some skinny, young-faced kid who couldn't have been any older than 20. His name was Jordan. Jordan looked like someone who belonged at a skater park. He gave us a weird smile upon greeting us. He told Jake and I that we were the 4th and 5th applicants that had been interviewed that day, and that the other applicant who had come in had been hired on the spot for the position that they wanted. That's strange, I thought, people being hired on the spot. That was rare anymore. It had taken me 3 interviews before I was hired to be the counselor at the group home I was working at before. I put the thought towards the back of my mind as Jordan walked us into the B&B. He led us into the kitchen, then he turned around to face us, saying, "I think Michael will like you too." And as Jake began to reply, from out of nowhere behind us appeared this big, tall, broad-built guy. He was so tall, in fact, he looked like he could be a replacement for some wrestler. Jake and I soon found out that this was Michael, the owner of the B&B. After Jake introduced the two of us to him, we followed Michael through a few rooms in the house as he led us to his office to sit and talk. I asked Michael who it was that I talked to on the phone earlier that evening when inquiring about the job, since I recognized by his voice that I hadn't been talking to him. Michael told me I'd been talking to his brother Charlie. Michael said that Charlie was the brains behind the whole operation. Operation? I asked. You mean behind opening up the B&B? Michael responded with a yes and a weird laugh, before saying, "Yeah, that's what I meant." Michael went on to tell us that Charlie would be around the B&B for a little while, but that mostly Charlie would be working behind the scenes, and that he, Michael, and his son Jordan and his daughter Marissa would be the ones who would be running and operating the B&B from day to day, once it opened. He then told us that he, Jordan, and Marissa worked for Charlie, and that Charlie was an affiliated worker for something and worked within the government. This piqued my curiosity, so I asked Michael what exactly that kind of government work was that his brother did. But Michael wouldn't say. In fact, he changed the subject by suggesting we follow him to his office so he could interview us there, and we did. As we finally entered his office, the first thing that stood out to me was how creepy it was. There were taxidermied and embalmed animals of all types on shelves and tables around the room. Bucks, alligator, a wolf, even a boar's head mounted above the door. You name it, and Michael had it. However, I didn't give too much of a thought what he had in his office. I just wanted a job. Besides, everyone has to have a hobby, right? Jake and I sat at the desk, ready to be interviewed by Michael. Michael explained how he hoped to get 2 more people hired on, so he could finally get to work on getting the B&B ready for opening in the late fall. The interview began with Michael asking us really weird questions along with the usual, but some were really personal questions, like when was our last physical, or if we were on any prescription medicine, and just some really odd stuff that seemed really inappropriate for an employer to be asking you. Throughout all these questions, Jake and I were really confused to what the heck these questions had to do with the job itself. Michael assured us, though, that the questions were 100% being legitimately asked, in case any emergencies happened to one of us while working for him. It all seemed like a bunch of BS to me, and to be honest, I felt as if I was ready to just get up and get out of there. I was starting to think that maybe this wasn't even a real interview, but some kind of darned scam or something. But then the desperateness of me wanting a job kicked back in, and on top of that, Michael reassured us with seriousness once more that the questions were being asked due to safety in the workplace. And so I stayed for the rest of the interview, and so did Jake. Still, I felt as if something was off about the entire thing, but I didn't want to leave because I knew I couldn't. I needed a job. At that point, Michael said the interview was over, and that we both were hired because he liked us. Great, I thought I'd gotten it. I finally got a job, and inside my mind, that was all that mattered. Michael then showed us around the B&B, telling us that before the place opened, we'd have to pitch in and do a lot of cleaning to the place, and indeed he was right. With the exception of 4 rooms in the B&B, every other room he showed us looked like a complete dump, including one room having a whole heap of water damage from a leak in the roof that had only recently been fixed. We also met Michael's daughter Marissa, who, honestly, looked as if she had been strung out on something pretty bad. She didn't seem all there when he introduced us. I didn't want to seem rude and just pretended not to notice. We met the other employees there, Katrina and Rob, and we also met Charlie. And let me tell you, Charlie was one creepy guy. He had a cold, emotionless demeanor, and he didn't really seem interested in meeting his new employees. After viewing the entire inside of the house, I was thinking that's it. We've seen the house, we've been hired. We can go home now and come back on Monday, right? Bright and early for work. Nope, because Michael then takes us out to the garage. He says he has one last thing to show us, which would be the wooded nature trail, which he said would really bring in the guests. I wanted to refuse as it was already night and pitch dark out. But he gave us a flashlight each, before he took one for himself, and then he grabbed a shotgun off the shelf. Jake and I looked at one another, then at Michael as if he were nuts. However, he assured Jake and I that he was taking the gun because of the coyotes that often roamed around the area at night. That should have been the first red flag that snapped me out of it, no matter how much I needed the job. I didn't want to follow a practical stranger out into the woods, much less a stranger toting around a gun at night. However, I decided to hide my fear and go along with the gun and wooded nature trail after all. I didn't want to lose the job I just got hired on for. So as we walked along this walking trail, making small talk along the way, we went deeper and deeper into the woods. Michael kept rambling about how he wanted some picnic tables or a giant pit for a bonfire out here. "Yeah, sounds great, man," I muttered, glancing at Jake to try to see his expression. After a while, we continued on in silence until I noticed I heard something. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or something like that, but as we walked farther out, the sounds grew louder. It was like a murmur or a whisper, although it sounded like several people mumbling or whispering at once. Michael made no notice of the noise as if he didn't hear it at all, but I knew that I wasn't the only one who could hear it, because I saw Jake's head swiveling from side to side, trying to see where the noises were coming from. "Hey, do you hear that?" he asked. "Yeah, man. What the heck is that?" Michael said nothing and continued on. Not familiar with our surroundings, all we could do was follow. Suddenly, I saw something in the distance. A washed-out light coming through the trees. We came upon this wide clearing which was dimly lit by a blazing fire in the middle. As we came forward towards the clearing, Jake and I froze. Inside the clearing stood about half a dozen figures wearing black hooded robes. They all froze too upon our arrival. To the left of the clearing lay some sort of animal obstructed from our view. I couldn't tell what type of animal it was, or what part of the animal it was for that matter, but I could definitely see blood. A cult. We seemed to have stumbled upon some kind of cult or ritual. Michael turned to look at us once he noticed we weren't following him anymore. He smiled a twisted smile then. "What the heck, man?" Jake yelled. "What is this crap?" "We welcome our new guests," he said, turning to the others in the robes, "to the beginning of the hunting ritual." I wanted to ask what they were hunting, but I had this sick, twisted feeling in my gut that I already knew. God, we were stupid. Michael raised his shotgun in the air as if it were some prize, then hollered out to the others, who yelled out behind him. What in the world? I thought. This is beyond ridiculous. Michael then fired off the shotgun in the air, screaming. In all honesty, I froze. I was beyond terrified at the moment. I blinked, hoping this wasn't happening, but I was wrong. It was happening and it was real. We had been lured into a freaking scam, possibly a deadly scam. We were either going to be accomplices to something carried out by this group of crazies, or become their victims. I began to panic, but I didn't have time to do so. Jake saw our chance when Michael turned his back to us for a brief moment. "Ryan, run!" he cried, sprinting back towards the path we came from. We sprinted back through the woods, running along the trail as if the devil himself were chasing us. I heard gunshots ringing out behind us, along with a riot of angry curses and footsteps running towards us. We ducked and dodged, not really sure the direction the shots were being fired from or towards. All I knew is that I had to keep moving. Somehow, by the graces of God, we made it out of there. We got back to my truck, unlocked the doors, jumped in, and sped away, just as the group of them caught up with us and began shooting at my tires. Jake wanted to drive straight to the police. I argued because I knew that no one would believe the story. So we kept quiet, and I ended up telling my sister and nephews that the job just wasn't for me. A few weeks later, I ended up getting another job at a local fast food chain. Jake and I never talked about what we saw that night, never brought it up again, and whenever I had to drive that way towards town, I always went out of my way to avoid driving by the B&B and its property line. For a while, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I was afraid. I was so worried they would try to come after us, but they never did. 6 months later, I packed up and moved for better working opportunities. And now I live in another state entirely. To this day, I still have nightmares from time to time. And who's to say Charlie won't try recruiting new people to do the same type of job scam? Unlucky people like us. So I'm warning you, be careful to what jobs you take and respond to on Craigslist. Because if this could happen to me and to my friend Jake, it could happen to anyone out there. It could happen to you. I needed to call my mom. From Kelsey D. It was 2001. I started working at a teacher's store that was literally called the Teacher's Store in southeast Grand Rapids, Michigan. Due to a corporate takeover of a family business, literally everyone on the payroll had quit all at once, upset about the transfer, and I suddenly became the only employee. I showed up on my third day and I was alone. I ended up trying to keep the store afloat. I was working 60 hours per week and was deemed manager almost immediately, even though I was a 20-year-old kid, really. Needless to say, I was not prepared for being in that position. Now, the back room was lined with wires. It was the definition of a fear cage, which is the phenomenon of being in a space that makes you feel like you're being watched. But really, it's just the electricity emanating from the wires that might be giving you that feeling. So I ignored it whenever I felt it, at first anyway. Before long, I began to hear sounds coming from the sales floor after closing time. Sounds like books dropping onto shelves, stuff moving around. Creeped out, I began calling my mom at closing time, and I would keep her on the line from the point I turned off the lights in the back until I walked all the way through the dark sales floor and out the front door, locking it behind me. It made me feel safe, and she'd be able to call emergency services if something or someone attacked me. I started to hear things moving around in the back room. Little things, but noticeable in the late evening when everything was supposed to be quiet. Then, one day, after I'd hired some new employees, I was in the back room at the manager's desk. I was doing some paperwork. All of a sudden, I felt a sudden blast of air hit my face. There was no denying it. No draft blasted me from the wall 2 feet in front of me. I was not imagining things. This was paranormal. Needless to say, I was then looking for a different job. Shortly after that event, and I know this sounds crazy, I heard something weird at about 10 p.m. one day. I heard a didgeridoo. No joke. It was coming from the loading dock in a totally commercial area. No homes were nearby, just businesses and parking lots. A didgeridoo is a bamboo instrument, a reeded woodwind, invented by northern indigenous Australians. It's a very recognizable sound, and needless to say, a totally foreign sound for that area. Standing there, alone, surrounded by this mysterious sound, I was at my breaking point. I was done. I quit that job shortly thereafter, and I never went back. I'm sorry the story ends so abruptly. I wish I knew if the building was still haunted. Nowadays, it's a jewelry store. Maybe someday I'll stop by and see if there's still activity happening in the building. Probably not, though. My biggest fear was that something would follow me home. For someone who fancied herself a paranormal enthusiast, I'm just so done. I noped right out of there. Youth Shelter Haunting. From Cricket Girl 20. I used to work at a youth shelter. For privacy reasons, I'm going to leave the name of the place private. I used to stay at the shelter after my mom passed. Once I moved out of it, I got a short-term job there. It was supposed to be a 9-month job, but I would only work 4 months there due to the experiences I had. On my first day working there in February, I was helping my coworkers clean out the old storage room. My coworker Richard and I were putting stuff in the wagon when a box blew off the blue shelf near us. It hit Richard right on the head. We just stared at each other before he picked it up. It had just flown off the shelf by itself. On another occasion, when we were taking a break, there were 6 people in the office altogether, just talking, when we all heard something moving around. Slowly, we all turned to see a first aid kit falling off a rack that was on a printer, which was on a big filing cabinet. It came close to hitting Cal in the face. We all sat there for about 10 seconds in silence before DeAndre picked it up slowly and said, "That's weird." A while later, after we resumed working, Richard and I were in the resource room when a broom fell, almost hitting me in the head. I looked at Richard, and he was white as a ghost. I just picked the broom back up and gently put it back on the broom rack. Later on in March, I was cleaning the showers when I began to hear footsteps. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone there. I still kept hearing them while cleaning the showers. I was so on edge that I screamed when my coworker Anna said my name. It made me jump. One day I was helping my coworker Lenore clean on the resource room side of the shelter. At one point, we closed the door to the water heater room when we heard this dunk, dunk, dunk sound. We honestly thought we had shut someone in the room by accident. We opened it back up, and we saw that the room was in fact empty. It gave us chills. The mop would be moved from place to place, and after moving it to the bathroom, I couldn't find it, because somehow it just appeared in the staff office. One time when a coworker named Ben and I were in the youth room cleaning, we heard what sounded like a little girl laughing behind us. The two of us turned around, confused, and didn't find anyone. There should have been no children down there. April went by with only minor events like pictures falling off the walls, hearing a coworker's voice when they weren't there, or hearing someone walking up and down the stairs. Now, May would be the month I quit. One day, DeAndre and I were in the resource room when a bag of clothes fell on its own. We both looked at each other. Now, me and DeAndre were close and still are, so we began to joke about it while he picked up the bag. As he was walking back over to me, a muffin pan fell on its own, making us both jump. And DeAndre said, "See, the ghosts don't like us talking about them." Then, I kid you not, we both saw a little girl walk past the open door. We looked at each other, and I asked him, "Did you see that?" Before he answered, every single food locker slammed open. We walked out of the resource room with scared looks on our faces. I quit that week. Ben also quit because of something scary happening to him. DeAndre still works there, and he says stuff like that still happens every so often. Not long after, 3 other staff members quit, also due to experiences they had. I'm glad I don't work there anymore. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com. If I told you there exists a demon that pursues people who think they're brave and takes on the most terrifying form possible to scare them, would you go looking for it? Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can follow me on Twitter at Dark Prevails, where I'm trying to find the creepypasta discussed in this episode's first story. Today I've got tons of demonic encounters for you to make you want to take a bath in holy water. Enjoy, and don't forget to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. Also, look for Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you can leave us a review to help us reach more listeners. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Unexplained Creatures in the Middle East. From Anonymous. Mar Dazma. It's a monster that feeds on one thing: fear. I'm very happy to say that I personally have had no encounters with it, but the stories that you might hear about it are usually told by people who are not liars. Allow me to explain what it is, first with some history. I live in Iran, specifically the province of eastern Azerbaijan. If you look up what is called the Iranian Plateau, or the Iranian Cultural Continent, or Greater Iran, you'll find Iran and a bunch of her neighboring countries. In this area, different branches of Iranian languages are spoken, and with similar cultures comes similar mythology, and with that comes shared monsters. Originally, we believed in monsters called Deeves. They are creations of Ahriman, the devil. Deeves are a mortal enemy to the human race, like demons in Western culture. Imagine ghouls with the strength to lift a mountain, with claws and teeth like daggers, and impenetrable skin. If that's not overpowered enough, they're also said to be very smart, capable of using black magic to do things like taking different forms. There are famous Deeves, such as Cheshmak, who is responsible for earthquakes and hurricanes. Some appear in Shahnameh, the book of ancient Iranian legends, such as the White Deev, who imprisoned the Shah of Iran and was defeated by a warrior from Sistan. After the Muslim conquest and conversion to Islam, people kept their culture, but the Deeves were now called by an Islamic name, Jinn. Mar Dazma is a Deev. Of course, that means some might call it Jinn. The word Mar Dazma in Persian and other Iranian languages means man-tester or man-challenger. It may be pronounced a bit differently in various parts: Mar Dazma, Mart Ozma, some might call it Javan Ozma, meaning young tester or even jinn, but they all refer to the same thing, a Div which can take different forms, even the forms of your loved ones. It can mimic the sounds of your loved ones, and do anything it can to draw you into graveyards or forests or dark alleys and dark corners at night. When it takes the form of an animal or human, it looks completely natural. It feeds on fear and, oddly enough, never attacks timid people. It likes to scare brave souls. That's why it is called Challenger. Mar Dazma uses various ways and tactics. Sometimes it takes the forms of innocent-looking farm animals, such as sheep, goats, or dogs, and approaches lone people in the dark. Then it suddenly speaks or changes forms. Sometimes it might approach a lonely traveler or stranger. Sometimes you hear someone that you know calling you, trying to draw you into the woods or dark caves or something of the sort. If you go in, though, it will scare you to death. You might have a heart attack, so yeah, it can kill people. There are times it might appear as a thin and skinny-looking creature, but as you want to investigate what it is exactly, it will start to rapidly grow taller and taller into a gigantic monster right from your nightmares. Maybe one night you're getting home late. A head comes out of a dark corner. Maybe the face looks like your neighbor. But as you want to say hello, the face begins to change. The more you look, the uglier and scarier it becomes, until either you look away and run or continue watching the show and die of sheer terror. The Challenger always invents new ways to scare people, and usually it doesn't want to kill you, it just wants you to be scared. But there is one thing that will make it angry, so angry in fact that it will not hesitate to tear you apart. Never tell Mar Dazma that you are not scared of it. Never challenge the Challenger. Some believe that if you become friends with a Mar Dazma, it can tell you the places of lost objects, or give you life advice, or tell you something from the future. But I wouldn't risk it. My apologies for the long introduction. Just keep in mind that Mar Dazma only challenges the brave. So if you're a scaredy cat like me, there's no need to worry. Here are the stories. The first two I heard from people that I trust, and the last one is a famous story told around here, so take it with a grain of salt. Number 1. The Floating Man. This story is from an old man in my village in eastern Azerbaijan, Iran. Our main product is apples. It happened in a trail around our village. During the day, it's gorgeous, but at night, it can be a very scary place. I will share the story from his point of view. I was younger, you see. Our watering schedule at the apple farm was set up so that each garden would have a few hours of water. My shift at the gardens began in the middle of the night, so I would have to wake up, pick up my shovel, then go to the gardens to water the apple trees. It was an hour-long walk, and it went right through the graveyard, then along through other people's gardens. I know what you're thinking, but no, it didn't happen in the graveyard. The night in question, I was able to pass through the graveyard without any trouble. I then entered the part of the path that was surrounded by trees. These trees formed a thick wall along the shoulders of the road. Here, all you can see are the stars above and the road, lit by the moonlight below you. I soon arrived at the spot where there are some big rocks on the ground. I was looking down to watch my steps, so that I didn't trip over one. It was then that I felt a presence above me. It was like I felt a shadow of fear lay over me. Hesitantly, I looked up. Between two of the trees, I saw this tall man floating above me. He had his hands completely open. Imagine someone floating in a pool with their front side and face in the water. And imagine you're under the water below them, sitting at the bottom, and they're staring right at you. That's what it was like. I was terrified when I saw his face. His eyes were big and wide open, almost popping out of their sockets. And his teeth, I wasn't sure if he was smiling or baring his teeth at me, or if he just didn't have lips at all. But I knew those teeth did not look natural for a human. I whimpered, "What are you?" And it spoke to me. "I am." But I didn't really want to stay there and hear what else it had to say. I quickly dropped my shovel and began to run with all the power I could summon in my legs. I'm not sure if it followed me or not, because I never did look back. I stopped only when I was back in the village on my doorstep. Even in the morning, I didn't dare go retrieve my shovel. I'm not sure what it was, and I was not going to stay there to hear the answer to my question. Number 2. The sheep. This story was told to me by a friend of mine. It happened to his great uncle in their village in Luristan. This story will be told from his point of view. I was in my 20s. One late, dark evening, I was on my way home, casually passing through the empty alleys when I saw this sheep at a small dead end. It was too late for sheep to be outside, unaccompanied and awake, so I thought it was a runaway. As I was watching it, I got a clearer look at it. It was a beautiful and healthy sheep. It looked to be a good breed, and I was very tempted to take it home myself. I was young and strong, so I just lifted it up and put it on my shoulders, and I kept walking. After a couple of steps, I remembered to check if it was a male or female, so I felt over between its legs. Now, as I'm just about to find out, the sheep brings its mouth closer to my left ear, and I hear it speak to me.
"You know, I'm way older than your grandfather."
Freaking out, I dropped the sheep, but when I looked back, it disappeared. It had just vanished like it was never there. When I arrived home, I told the story to my family, who said it was probably a jinn. Number 3. The story of Pahlavan Abbas. Pahlavan Abbas was a man in a small village named Tarmastan in Zagros Mountains. Pahlavan means champion because he was a wrestler, and Abbas was his name. Aside from wrestling, his main occupation was pottery. He had a student named Qasim who was going to learn his art. Qasim's father had passed away and he lived with his old mother. So Pahlavan Abbas had told Qasim that if there was any problem, he could ask him for help. One night there was a knocking at Pahlavan's door. It was Qasim saying, "Please hurry, Pahlavan. My mother is sick and I need your help to get her to a doctor." Now, Qasim seemed to be speaking with a different tone and accent than usual. But Pahlavan immediately got dressed and told Qasim to lead the way. After a while, it became clear that they were not on the right path to Qasim's house. Qasim was leading him outside of town. "Qasim, where are we going?" asked Pahlavan. Qasim just turned and smiled at him with yellow teeth. Weird, he thought. They climbed a hill and Qasim said, "We're here." "So where's your mom, Qasim?" As Qasim turned, Pahlavan saw that it wasn't Qasim at all. What he was now looking at was a hideous 3-meter-high creature with a humanoid body and the face of a dog. "What are you?" said Pahlavan. The creature replied,
"I am Mardasma. Are you scared?"
"No, a champion fears nothing," replied Pahlavan.
"Well, then you must wrestle with me. If you lose, I will take your life,"
said the creature. And so they wrestled, fighting for hours. And near the morning, Pahlavan managed to win. As the monster's back touched the ground, it turned into dust and smoke. With many bruises and a lot of pain, Palavan went back to the village, to the real Qasim, where he told the others what had happened to him before dying from exhaustion. This is an update to the original set of stories about Mar Tazma. Since writing that previous post, I spoke to a distant cousin of mine who recalled an adventure we had as kids, something I had forgotten about. Although this is technically one story, I think it would be best to break it into two. Number 4. Behind the window. I was staying at my parents' house. They told me I could sleep in the room upstairs. That room was pretty big. It had a lot of stuff and junk in it, kind of like the old attics in movies. There was a window in there, maybe about 2 meters by 2 meters, with thick curtains, and right under it was my bed. From the very start, I got a bad feeling about that window, but I just shrugged it off. At about 9 p.m., it started. Bang! It was like a muscular man had punched the glass as hard as he could. It was even more terrifying because I couldn't see outside. The curtains were too thick. Quickly, I ran downstairs in a panic, telling my grandmother, "Oh, don't worry. We didn't hear anything. It probably was just some bird or bat attracted to the light of your room. Just turn the light off and go to bed, honey." So I did. Around midnight, though, I was awakened by, you guessed it, another bang. This time I was in the bed, so it was only inches from my face. I tried to calm myself down, to go back to sleep, but around 3 a.m. it came again, this time much harder. It felt as if something was hiding on the other side of that window, just about to break through and take me away. I couldn't see anything, and I was way too scared to open the curtain and peek outside. The pure silence was killing me now, not a single cricket or dog barking. Slowly, I crawled out of bed, quietly making my way downstairs to my grandparents. All the while, I felt hunted by something. Once I got down there, I just slept on a blanket on the floor. It wasn't comfy at all, but at least it felt safe. The following night, I tried once again to sleep in that very same room and the very same bed. But the large window with the thick curtains never did have that haunting feeling again. I would even go on to sleep there many times throughout the years, and I never had any more supposed bats or birds banging on the window. Nowadays, I think it may have been Mar Tazma trying to scare me. I don't think bats would all of a sudden feel like going kamikaze on me like that. Number 5. The Brog. This always gave me the goosebumps. Back when we were kids, Kay, my cousin, and I would play together, going on adventures, discovering things, and so on. One summer, we were entrusted with the responsibility to herd a dozen cattle. We would gather them in the morning, take them out into the fields, start a fire, and cook lunch as they ate. We would take them then to a river or somewhere with water to drink. Then we would take them back to the village in the evening. Now keep in mind, this happened in the exact same trail as the story, The Floating Man, that I told before. The night before, we had read a made-up story, a creepypasta, if you will, about a monster called Brog, who haunted a road in another country. I've forgotten which country that was. Now, we knew it wasn't real, and even if it was in some other part of the world and could never get us. In this story, the Brog kind of looked like a werewolf. It was said that you would first feel hunted or stalked. Then suddenly all the birds in the area would flee away. You would then begin to hear footsteps behind you, and they would get closer as if they are walking inches behind you. Then you would hear the breathing. Not long after that, you would hear a massive, terrifying roar. by the time you turned around to see your stalker, you would see nothing more than a pair of red eyes, and the following morning, they would find your cold, dead body. Your skin turned black as coal, and that was when we got too spooked to read the rest. The next morning, we decided to make our way through, you guessed it, the trail. In the morning, it was truly beautiful. As the evening approached, it took a bit longer than we liked to gather our things and the cows. In the dark, we were walking along the trail with the cows in front of us. Now, at the time, we had not heard the story of the floating man, so we weren't scared at all of the trail ahead. But that was about to change. One by one, the signs of Brog started to come to life for us. First, that sudden and ominous feeling of being stalked. Second, the birds all around the valley suddenly getting spooked all at once and flying away. Third, the footsteps getting closer and closer to us. We tried to walk, not run, faster and faster. Suddenly, the bushes behind us began to make noises, as if something was running through them and shaking them. I said to my cousin, "Hey, why don't you take a look to see what's behind us?" "Dude, I'm as scared as you are. I'm not looking back," he said. We were sure that this was it, that we wouldn't see the light of tomorrow. But as we made it to the graveyard, suddenly things changed, as if something heavy was lifted from our hearts. We found the courage to look back. What was following us was just a dog, and it just turned back and ran into the wilderness. Later that night, we decided to read the rest of the Brog story. A certain part made our hearts churn in our chests. Brog can show itself as a dog. All these years later, I would shrug off the Brog adventure as us being kids. But now I think that something knew exactly and specifically what we were scared of, then presented itself in that way. There are other stories about that trail. I once heard someone say they saw something that would be best described as a mix between Yoda from Star Wars and a monkey, along that same trail at night. I found a big similarity in all of them. The graveyard is safe, and the Mar Dazma will not follow you there. My cousin believes that may be because there are good people buried there. Demonic Creature Encounter from Schaefer 9RX. This did not happen to me. It happened to my younger brother a few years ago, in 2020. To begin, I come from a very large family. My mother and a couple of my siblings have had very strange encounters with the paranormal, specifically a demonic presence. Personally, I've never had anything crazy happen to me. The odd things that have happened to me I can easily rationalize. It's important to note that my family and I are Christian. We believe the spiritual realm is real, and it sometimes allows itself to be seen by people at certain times. You may find this interesting, but I believe there is a difference between fallen angels and demons. Genesis 6 and the Book of Enoch give detailed and interesting depictions and origin stories, beginning with when Satan fell from heaven and took a third of the angels with him, going on to create Nephilim through mankind. I believe demons are the spirits of the Nephilim, because their souls are half angelic beings and half man. They must roam the earth until their appointed judgment from God. At times, demons can manifest themselves in many different ways, often for the purpose of influence. However, that is a whole other conversation and story of its own. Here is my brother's experience. This encounter took place across the street from where we live. My family and I live in the woods, way out in the country on the far outskirts of a small town in rural southwest Michigan. My brother used to do yard work and odd jobs for our neighbors across the street. One day in the late afternoon, my brother was doing some cleaning on our neighbor's pool. Our neighbor's pool is directly behind their house, and it's surrounded by forest. Encompassing the pool, except where it connects to the house, is about a 4 to 5 foot embankment. My brother was diligently working when he noticed something very strange. It was the middle of the summer. The sun was setting, and the forest was alive with birds, insects, and spring peepers, creating that beautiful summer melody. All of a sudden, everything abruptly went silent, like someone turned off a switch, shutting off all the noise. My brother said it felt so quiet that his ears began to ring. Being frightened by this sudden change in the atmosphere, he stopped working and began to look around, trying to make sense of it all. That's when he saw it. My brother turned and looked towards the far end of the pool, and standing on the other side of the embankment was this creature staring at him. My brother said it was not much more than 20 feet from him. Upon seeing this creature, my brother panicked so hard he fell backward to the ground. He began to crawl for cover. He then picked himself up and ran home as fast as he could and hid in his room. I recall arriving home shortly after the encounter. My mother told me, "You need to check on your brother. He doesn't seem to be doing too well." I did as she said. I found my brother in his bed, and I asked if he was okay. That's when he told me this story. He then described the creature he saw. He said the creature was dark gray in color, and the most memorable attribute was its large, piercing yellow eyes. My brother didn't get every detail of the creature because he didn't waste any time hightailing it out of there. He said the thing must have stood 8 or 9 feet tall because it was almost eye level with him, despite it standing on the other side of the 4-foot embankment. My brother went on, saying the facial features of it were animalistic, but also somehow resembled a man. The countenance of the thing can best be described as demonic. I believe my brother's encounter to be very real. His actions speak far louder than his words. When he told me this story, I could tell that his heart began to race, and he became visibly afraid. My brother is a very straightforward, no bullcrap kind of guy. He's also generally very skeptical, especially when it comes to the paranormal and when hearing about my mother and other siblings' experiences. For him to just tell a story like this, it goes way against his nature and character. My brother struggled to sleep after this encounter and suffered from severe nightmares, which would continue on for a few weeks. One night, my brother woke up out of a dead sleep in a panic. He had heard deep growling coming from his closet. I checked the closet for him, and of course there was nothing there. But I prayed over him, and I tried to comfort him as best I could. The day after the encounter, my brother acted very paranoid. He went back to the neighbor's house with a rifle, grabbed his tools, and never worked over there again. I don't know why my brother encountered this being, but after his experience, we had some horrible family tragedies take place. My brother told me his beliefs and perception of reality have forever been changed due to this experience. Watchers in the Park, from Up North Goon. This happened about 10 years ago in my hometown in northern Michigan. It stands as one of my few unexplainable encounters in life. I grew up in a small town, spent time in the Upper Peninsula my whole childhood, and I'm very familiar with many of the ghost stories in Michigan. But it never occurred to me that I would ever experience anything significant in my life. You see, I didn't really believe in ghosts, but I did enjoy the stories. I had few friends as I was a weird kid, so the few I had were very special to me. My childhood best friend, Jay, moved to my town in first grade, and we quickly made off as good friends. We played on the playground together, messed around in class to annoy the teacher together. We were basically inseparable. Fast forward to the end of 4th grade. Jay's family moved to Kansas, which naturally upset me. But he would come to visit his grandparents who lived in town every summer after that. The summer of my 7th grade year, he would continue to come visit his grandparents. He did the very same that summer. So, come June, I went to visit for the first week of my summer vacation. His grandparents lived on the south end of town, a block behind the only other traffic light we had. Just across the road from them was the town park, and next to that, of course, was the cemetery. The park was decent-sized with a long driveway and decent-sized dirt parking lot. At the back edge of the lot, there's a hill that leads down to the 2 baseball diamonds, and to the right of the lot was the play area and public bathrooms. A chain-link fence separated the park from the cemetery. There were only 2 lights on at the park at night, one at the bathrooms and one in the parking lot. On the first night staying at Jay's grandparents', it was like any other summer. We were very excited to see each other. Dinner was on the stove, dessert in the oven. We were just enjoying our evening. Usually, we like to play in the park, set up baseball games, mess around in the woods directly behind the fields. At night, we would go over to the playground side and tell ghost stories, since after the air cooled down at night, a thick fog would roll off the cemetery and make things creepy. It really set the stage for these stories. That night would be no different. Around 1 a.m., we set out for the park. As usual, the fog started rolling over the playground, and it was rather quiet, and it was a bit chilly heading into the park. Me, Jay, and his older brother E got halfway down the driveway when E noticed his older sisters on the back end of the baseball fields. He said, "Hey, let's go scare the girls." He started to walk over that way, but then we saw him stop dead in his tracks. He glanced over into the tall grass field next to the driveway. I stopped too, watching E. His face went pale, as if he had just seen a ghost. That worried me. E did not scare easily. When I followed his gaze, I saw what he was looking at, and apparently so did Jay. By then, all of us had frozen in fear. In the middle of the field, standing about 7 feet tall, were these 3 shadowy figures. Looking closer at them, I noticed they weren't simply shadowy. They were just big shadows. They stood in the field, looking at Jay and E's sisters and their friends. They appeared to be wearing long trench coats with brimmed hats, but they were darker than the night itself. E snapped out of the daze and shakily said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" They didn't answer, of course, so he spoke louder. "Hey, what are you doing?" At this point, I was terrified, and after E had yelled that last time, those 3 figures turned their attention to us. Whatever in the world they were, they definitely weren't human, and they did not look nice either. When they turned, it was the most unnatural-looking thing I'd ever seen, and their eyes looked straight through our souls. Beady small yellow dots on an otherwise blank face. E screamed as loud as he could at his sisters to run, then turned, grabbing me and Jay. Together, we sprinted back to the house, hiding in the living room the rest of the night, not sleeping at all. Once the sun came up, we decided we'd go over to the park and check the field for footprints or any clues as to what we saw the night before. Once we were over there, we found large, flattened spots in the grass, but no tracks leading out to it. The spot was just big enough to hold those 3 figures. To this day, I have no good explanation for it all. That park isn't even known to be haunted. But I've never been back there at night ever since. Warning. The following story contains violence against pets. Something killed my dogs. From Gray. I share these stories as I've gotten over the terror they've given me. I'm sure they can give you a nice scare. My first story starts with a warning. please be careful who your family dates. My older brother used to date a woman who had warned that her family was cursed. I didn't really care what she said, but strange things began to happen when she moved in with us. My cousin and I used to play outside after dark with my little brothers, playing hide and seek. I would soon start getting these creepy feelings, like I was being watched and judged. I listened to my gut feelings, and I began to watch my little brothers and cousins more closely. On one occasion, I noticed a strange dog was watching them as they played. Now, my family has quite a few dogs, 5 at the time. 2 pit bull hybrids, 1 albino, the other brown, a German shepherd, a mixed sheepdog, and finally a dog I didn't know the breed of, but it looked like the other 2 pit hybrids we had. It was colored a mix of brown and black. However, the dog I saw watching us was a mass of fur and colored a dark brownish color. Its jaw had this overbite. I could see ribs on it, and its back legs looked wrong, like they mismatched. I should mention here that I am Native American. My tribe says if a skinwalker shapeshifts into something, sometimes a part of it comes out wrong. After seeing this dog, I got everyone to go back inside. We would not be playing after dark for as long as I had that feeling. If the feeling went away by the next day, I was going to let my little brothers and cousins play. That night, our dogs got into a fight with something. I listened to them fight it all night. The dogs were vicious. After the fight, I waited until the sun was up. I went right out to investigate. The whole yard was a mess. I could see where the fight started and where it went. The sand and bushes where the fight started looked like a dog fight. But as I followed where it progressed, I started to see whatever my dogs were fighting getting bigger and bigger. The aftermath of where the fight ended, it looked like a horse and another horse had fought. The bushes were uprooted, and there was a hole about 5 inches deep and 7 feet wide. I got pale, and I ran to check on my dogs. My dogs only had some scratches and bruises. This is where it gets creepy. 3 to 4 months after this, the 2 pits died from fighting some cougar, a cougar that decided to come up to our house. The dog that looked like a pit had to be put down too. It had gotten attacked by a porcupine, and the quills went too deep into the dog's face. The German shepherd got hit by a car and broke both back legs. My family and I tried to nurse it back to health. We even made some splits and wrapped both legs. Sadly, its legs still got infected, and she passed away. Our sheepdog disappeared, and we later found it dead. It had choked on something it was eating a good 130 yards away from my house. They all fought that skinwalker, and later died in odd ways. My older brother and I buried the dogs where we bury our pets. We placed stones on them to prevent scavengers from digging them up. As we were walking back from burying the last dog, something weird happened to me. I got really tired all of a sudden, and my vision began to go black. I let my brother know what was going on, and he made me sit down in the direction of the dog's graveyard. My vision went black, like I was blind, and I couldn't see at all. My other senses were fine, but my vision was affected. As I waited with my brother, I swear I could hear the dogs we buried barking loudly. As I listened to the dogs, my vision returned to me. We then walked back to the house together. As time passed, my vision deteriorated. I now wear glasses, but I'm glad everything's all over. That thing, whatever it was, I believe it took part of my vision, and it took our dogs. But it did not take my family. I would do anything to protect my family. A warning to you all, keep good and strong dogs if you live near skinwalkers. And know a good medicine man if you can. Bad Ouija board experience. From Jack. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, I was in primary 7 in school. It was a tradition that all the pupils go to Edinburgh for an end-of-year trip. I had only joined the school about a year prior, and I found it hard to make friends as everyone else had already been friends for years. So I would spend my break time and lunchtime on my own. The teachers who were organizing the trip noticed this. They decided to put me into a room with 6 other boys, probably hoping that I would bond with them. One of the days we were there, we went to a place called the Edinburgh Dungeons. It was basically like a ghost train, but without the train. It was pretty cool. At the end of it, there was a gift shop, and they had this basket of wrapped-up items behind the counter that were only £1. We didn't know what was inside it, but everyone was lining up to get a gift since £1 was such a deal. On the way back to where we were staying, everyone was opening them up, and we all soon realized what we had purchased. A do-it-yourself Ouija board kit. It had candles, essential oils, a spell to summon spirits, and directions on how to use everything. On the last night, I had the idea to make the Ouija board. Only 2 of the boys were up for it, though. The rest were too scared and superstitious, despite acting like they were brave. We went and got what we needed to make our Ouija board, and we began to play. We moved the glass a few times, pretending we didn't do it, but after about 15 minutes, we were almost ready to call it a night, when the glass moved again. This time, we all swore that we hadn't done it. Being young and stupid, we didn't believe each other, as we accused one another of moving the glass. I said we should try it each on our own, just to prove it. I was the second person to have only my fingers on the glass. I felt it move on its own, I swear I did. Some other force was moving it. It felt very strange. After we all confirmed that it was none of us pushing the glass, we all put our fingers back on together. One of my friends began to ask questions, such as, "Who are you?" and "How did you die?" The spirit told us that he and many other spirits heard us calling out to them. At this point, we were all getting very freaked out, so we decided to stop playing. Around an hour had gone by since we stopped playing with the Ouija board. Everyone in the room had gone to sleep, except for me. I began to hear strange noises around the room, and I thought I kept seeing strange, shadowy figures in the corner of the room. I didn't want to stay there, so I went next door into the girls' room, as they were all still awake, and I sat with them. I still don't believe it. From Anonymous. I was maybe 12 years old when I saw it. We had just moved to a new town. I was happy, being able to make new friends and all. I remember sitting at the park, only half a block from my home. It was a bright day, not a cloud in the sky. I was shocked when a kid came up to me. I'd only lived here a few days at that point. The kid's name was Joe. Joe was tall, maybe the age of 16. I asked him what was up, but he just smiled at me. I thought that was weird until he finally spoke. "Do you know what happened in your house?" I felt uncomfortable then, but I shook my head to answer. He smiled again. "Just don't try to be brave." He left after that. I asked around at school about him and the house I was at. Turns out there is a legend, so to speak, that the house I live in was used by a man who summoned a supposed monster. I told my parents, but they laughed and said I was just being silly. I made up my mind that day. I wish I hadn't. That night I decided to climb into the attic. The attic was dark and smelled of death, and dust filled my nose. I turned on the flashlight that I'd brought with me. I scanned the room, but I didn't find anything out of the ordinary. I'd been looking for signs of this man who summoned a monster. I felt rather relieved, having not found anything. I was thinking all of this was just silly. Still, I wanted to know what else was up here. I began to move things around, pushing items aside. I wish I'd just left. A soft hissing sound came from behind me. I thought that one of our cats, which we had two of, had climbed up after me. Still, I felt uneasy. I sighed and told the cat to go back downstairs. In return, I heard a deep laugh, unlike anything that might come from a human. I felt my heart sink for a few moments. I was shaking, too scared then to move, to make a sound. I got the feeling that something wanted me out of there. My breath caught in my throat. A hard, cold hand grabbed onto my shoulder. I wanted to scream, but no sound would leave my lips. A voice, something that sounded more akin to a vampire than a person, spoke in my ear. "You don't belong here." I somehow managed to speak, but all I could whimper was, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Leave now." Whatever it was, threw me down from the attic. I missed the stand I'd used to climb up, landing instead on the floor. Thankfully, it wasn't that much of a fall. I looked up and I saw something looking down at me. Something with a head that had a sickly gray color to it. Eyes cold and full of hate, teeth a sickening yellow. All of this just peeking out from the lip of the attic entrance. In some places, there was no skin, just bone. Thin black hair hung from the top of its head. I shook uncontrollably looking at it. This thing looked like it was right out of a horror show. I ran to my room, and I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat up in my bed all night, rocking back and forth, sitting close to my nightlight. I was too scared to move much more than that. After morning came, I busied myself downstairs, not wanting to be on the second floor, not wanting to be near the attic. I told my parents, but they got mad at me that I went up there alone, not believing my story at all. For the next 2 days, I barely slept at all. Finally, when I did fall asleep, I was awakened by that voice. "I told you, you don't belong." I froze, slowly opening my eyes. Eventually, I got out of bed to peer out of my room. I could see the attic door open. Something was hanging out of it, a claw-like hand, holding a bloody, dripping bird. I don't recall much after that. I must have screamed or fainted. When I woke up, I was on the couch downstairs. We ended up moving my room downstairs too. And I never told anyone else about this beyond my parents, until now. My experience owning a demonic doll. From Anonymous. Over the summer, I came into contact with a very nice lady online named Mary. Mary had a very interesting item up for sale. A doll. A doll that was supposedly very haunted. I asked about it, and she gave me all the details on it. I was very curious about it still, and also very skeptical. I asked if she knew the original owner. She did, and the original owner's name was apparently Michael. Through her, I was able to contact Michael and have a conversation on Charlie. I'd like to share the doll's story and my own personal experiences with owning a demonic doll. When the original owner, Michael, was 3, his parents began to foster children, and usually they'd keep them for 6 months until they found them a good home. But on Michael's 9th birthday, his parents decided to foster Charlie. This was Michael's 9th birthday present. Charlie had AML, which stands for acute myeloid leukemia. Because of this, he was very sick. Michael hated Charlie. He saw Charlie as the reason he didn't get anything else for his birthday. With Charlie having AML, he was not cheap to take care of, and a lot of money had to come out of Michael's parents' pockets in order to keep Charlie healthy. AML affects the bone marrow and white blood cells. It's a form of cancer and affects about 200,000 people every year. The life expectancy of someone with AML is 2 to 5 years, sometimes longer with treatment. It can be quite painful, causing pain in the bones and extreme back and leg pain. Again, Michael didn't dislike Charlie. He hated him. Michael always said there was something wrong with Charlie. Charlie loved attention. He loved seeing Michael get teed off. Seeing Michael get ignored by his family made Charlie happy. Michael said he always thought Charlie was evil, but no one saw through his charade. They simply thought of him as a poor, sick boy. Weirdly enough, whenever Michael came down with an illness, Charlie seemed to be more energetic and feeling better. And as Charlie stayed with them, Michael seemed to get more and more sick more frequently. When Michael was feeling good and getting attention from his parents, suddenly Charlie would have a flare-up and need attention all day. Other strange things would happen as well. During the time Charlie was with them, they tried buying pets for him. But all of his pets would soon mysteriously die. Charlie never seemed to care about his pets dying. He also didn't care about his AML. According to Michael, Charlie behaved as if his disease was more of a nuisance. Well, something strange did happen. Michael woke up one morning, feeling a dark energy. He asked Charlie if he could feel it too, but Charlie said no. It was around then that Michael said that he knew when Charlie was going to die. During Charlie's final months, Charlie began to act happier. During his flare-ups, he would get excited and have energy that he shouldn't have. Everyone put it off as a delusion from his weakened blood flow. The day Charlie died, he and Michael had a talk. He referred to it as the talk because it was the last private conversation he and Charlie had. The day he died, he said everything felt off before it happened. Michael knew it was going to happen, and so did Charlie. They discussed if he was scared of dying. They discussed their beliefs about the afterlife, and about what Charlie was going to do when he was on the other side. As the conversation came to a close, he told Michael not to worry, stating that he would be back in a few days. Michael was very confused. Later that night, Charlie became very ill. There were doctors rushing in and out with medical equipment. They decided he should pass in his home peacefully. A few hours later, Charlie was gone. After Charlie's passing, Michael said it was like a cloud had cleared and the sun had finally risen. The dark energy that surrounded the house was gone. One night, Michael felt that dark energy again. He followed the sensation to Charlie's room. This had become a sort of storage area now. He said he could feel evil coming from the room. He opened the door and walked in. He went to the shelf of porcelain dolls his mom had collected. He picked up a doll and swears he heard something. "Told you I'd be back." It was Charlie's voice. Michael was shocked, throwing the doll across the room. He blacked out then, having terrible dreams until he woke up. After that, he asked if he could go stay with his aunt and uncle for the rest of the summer. He believes that Charlie chose this doll as a vessel because it always creeped Michael out. He'd always been scared of the doll and Charlie knew it. In fact, Charlie would always sneak it into his room at night. Or he would tell Michael all about the doll and how it talked to him and moved around the room on its own. This is what led him to believe this is why Charlie would choose the doll. Years later, Michael's mother passed away, leaving him in possession of 3 of her dolls. All the foster kids received 3 porcelain dolls. It just so happened Michael received Charlie as one of the dolls. Nothing happened until a week later. Michael began to have the terrible dreams and began to feel drained. He got sick, and no matter what he did, he wouldn't get better. No matter how much sleep he got, he would still feel tired. That was when he decided that Charlie needed a new home, and eventually, Charlie came into my possession. Michael sold the doll to a collector who gladly took Charlie in. The collector began to experience these same exact things and decided she had taken on too much and had the doll relocated. I soon came across Charlie while scrolling through eBay one night. I decided to message the owner. She tried to convince me not to buy it and explained what I was getting myself into. I didn't believe a word of it, so without hesitation, I purchased Charlie. A week later, I received him. If I could go back in time and undo this, I would in a heartbeat. The moment I opened that box, I felt it. It's hard to explain, but I could feel a change in the air. I picked up the doll and got chills immediately. I put it off as a coincidence, and I brought Charlie into my room. Setting it up, I told it that it was just a stupid doll. How could it possibly be evil? I had to go to work then, so I closed my door and left. When I got home later that night, I walked in and I could feel it. That weird feeling again. I brushed it away once more as a coincidence. I walked into my room and found Charlie still there, but that feeling was still in the air. The energy it gave off was so powerful. I got in the shower, then I went to bed. That night, I had horrible dreams. I would be somewhere peaceful with family or friends, and all of a sudden, they would go away, and this thing would chase me up and down, ripping me apart. I call it thing because no words could describe it. I've never seen anything like it before, and I hope I never do again. Other weird things began happening as well. Lights would flicker or die. Phones would die all of a sudden. My TV and game consoles all of a sudden didn't work anymore. Finally, after 3 weeks of hell, I had enough. I was dead set on getting Charlie a permanent home away from mine. I did research and found a place to keep Charlie out of harm's way. In my time with Charlie, I can tell you there are some things none of us can explain in this world. I can tell you that demonic and possessed items are not something you ever want to mess with, and they're very real. Whatever Charlie was, I can tell you he sure as heck wasn't normal. And I kind of believe Michael now when he said that he didn't think Charlie was human. I just hope whatever or whoever Charlie is finds peace at last. Thank you for listening to another unsettling episode of Unexplained Encounters. You can send us your story to have it narrated on the show at darkstories.org. Unexplained Encounters is an EerieCast original series. You can find other horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com, such as Redwood Bureau, a fictional anthology series, Freaky Folklore, a documentary-style series about myths and cryptids around the world, Destination Terror, a show about the most haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, another show I host all about the scary things that happen to people at work. Again, that's EerieCast.com. By the way, if you want fewer annoying ads and you want to support what we do, consider going to EerieCast.com/plus to sign up for EerieCast Plus. That unlocks all our podcasts with all but host-read ads removed. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.